The sound of a heart monitor flatlining is the loudest silence in the world. It is a sound that splits a life into before and after. But for Adrian Pierce, a man who prided himself on controlling every outcome, that sound was irrelevant. While his wife, Eliana, held their 4-year-old son's cooling hand, begging God for a miracle that would never come, Adrian was not stuck in traffic. He was not in a boardroom saving the company. He was popping a bottle of Dom Perignon in the penthouse suite of the Ritz, celebrating a merger that didn't exist, wrapped in the arms of a woman who wasn't his wife. He didn't know that with his son's final breath, a countdown had begun. Not for grief, but for his total annihilation. The rain in Seattle battered the windows of St. Jude's Children's Hospital, creating a rhythm that usually soothed the patients. But inside room 402, there was no peace. The air smelled of antiseptic and desperate prayers. Eliana sat on the uncomfortable plastic chair she hadn't left in 3 days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair matted, her expensive blouse wrinkled and stained with spilled apple juice. She looked nothing like the polished trophy wife Adrian Pierce liked to parade at galas. Right now, she was just a mother watching the life drain out of her entire world. 4-year-old Leo looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. The leukemia had been aggressive, a thief in the night that stole his laughter and replaced it with bruises and fatigue. The doctors had been hopeful a week ago, but tonight the lead oncologist, Dr. Aris Thorne, no, not Thorne, let's use Dr. Aris Kincaid, had taken Eliana aside with a look that shattered her soul. "His organs are shutting down, Mrs. Pierce," Dr. Kincaid had said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to call his father. Now." Eliana's hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She dialed Adrian. "Ring. Ring. Ring. Please, Adrian," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Pick up. Just pick up. You have reached the voicemail of Adrian Pierce, CEO of Pierce Dynamics. I am currently unavailable." She hung up and dialed again. And again. She sent texts. "Leo is fading. Doctors say it's time. Please come, he's asking for you." Across the city, the vibe was entirely different. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons was bathed in the warm, golden glow of mood lighting. Smooth jazz played softly from high-end speakers. Adrian Pierce, a man with a jawline carved from granite and a soul made of ledger sheets, laughed as he poured another glass of champagne. He was 38, handsome, and undeniably powerful. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusting the collar of his custom-made Italian silk robe. "Who keeps buzzing you, darling?" Tiffany asked. She was lounging on the velvet chaise, wearing nothing but Adrian's dress shirt. She was 22, an ambitious marketing intern at his firm, who had decided the fastest way to the top was through the CEO's zipper. Adrian glanced at his phone vibrating on the marble countertop. The screen flashed Eliana, wife, for the 10th time. "Just the ball and chain," Adrian sneered, silencing the call and flipping the phone face down. "She's hysterical. Leo probably just scraped his knee or had a bad reaction to the chemo meds again. She panics over everything." "You work so hard," Tiffany cooed, walking over to wrap her arms around his waist. "You deserve a break. Besides, didn't you say you paid for the best doctors? Let them do their jobs." "Exactly," Adrian said, taking a sip of the expensive wine. "I pay Dr. Kincaid a fortune to handle the messy parts. Tonight is about us. I closed the deal with the Japanese investors. I deserve a celebration." He didn't mention that the deal was shaky at best, or that he had liquidated a portion of Leo's trust fund to cover the bribe money. In Adrian's mind, he was untouchable. He was the sun, and everyone else just revolved around him. Back at the hospital, Leo stirred. His eyelids fluttered, heavy and translucent like parchment. "Daddy?" he rasped. It was a tiny sound, barely a whisper. Eliana's heart broke into 1,000 shards. She leaned in, stroking his forehead. Daddy is on his way, baby. He's flying as fast as he can. He loves you so much." It was a lie. The bitter taste of it coated her tongue. She grabbed her phone one last time. She didn't call Adrian. She called the one person she had been too proud to call for years. Her father. "Dad," she sobbed into the receiver. "It's time." Magnus sat in the back of his vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, the city lights blurring past him. He was a man of few words and terrifying capability. Most people knew him as a retired antique dealer, a quiet man who lived on a sprawling estate outside the city. Adrian Pierce certainly thought of him that way, a boring old man with a modest pension and dirt under his fingernails. Adrian had never bothered to look deeper. He had never checked the shell companies, the real estate holdings in Zurich, or the fact that Magnus's last name wasn't just a name, it was a legacy in the shipping industry. Magnus gripped his cane, the silver lion's head handle digging into his palm. "Faster, Roberts," he commanded the driver. "Yes, Mr. Valerius." But traffic was a nightmare. A jackknifed tractor-trailer on the I-5 had turned the highway into a parking lot. In room 402, time had run out. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor began to slow. "Beep! Beep! Beep!" "No, no, no," Eliana whispered. She climbed onto the bed, curling her body around her son's frail frame, trying to transfer her own warmth, her own life force, into him. "Leo, stay with Mummy. Please, Leo, look at me." Leo's eyes, once bright blue like his father's, were dull and unfocused. He looked toward the door, searching, waiting. "Daddy?" he breathed one last time. Then he exhaled, a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his short, painful life. The monitor let out a singular, piercing tone. "Beep." "Leo!" Eliana screamed. It was a primal sound, a tear in the fabric of reality. Nurses rushed in, Dr. Kincaid barking orders, but they all knew it was formalities. At that exact moment, at the Four Seasons, Adrian was laughing at something Tiffany said. He reached for his phone to check the time. 11:42 p.m. He saw a text from Eliana. It had arrived 1 minute ago. "He's gone." Adrian stared at the screen. For a second, just a split second, a flicker of something human passed behind his eyes. Shock? Guilt? But he quickly shoved it down. He couldn't deal with this now. He had a board meeting in the morning. If he went to the hospital now, it would be a scene. Screaming, crying, doctors. It was messy. "Is everything okay?" Tiffany asked, tracing a finger down his chest. Adrian turned the phone off completely. "Everything is fine," he lied, his voice steady. "Just a spam message. Come here." He chose pleasure over his son's corpse. 40 minutes later, the door to room 402 burst open. It wasn't Adrian. Magnus Valerius walked in, soaked from the rain, his expensive wool coat heavy with water. He saw the nurses disconnecting the tubes. He saw the white sheet pulled up. He saw his daughter, curled in a ball on the floor, rocking back and forth, making no sound at all. Magnus walked to the bed. He pulled back the sheet and looked at his grandson. Leo looked peaceful, finally free of pain. Magnus placed his large, weathered hand on Leo's cold cheek. A single tear tracked through the wrinkles on the old man's face. He turned to Eliana. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He knelt beside her and pulled her into his chest. "Where is he?" Magnus asked. His voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous resonance. "Where is Adrian?" Eliana looked up, her eyes empty. "He didn't come. I called him. I begged him. He sent to voicemail." Magnus looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at his dead grandson. Then he looked at his daughter. The grief in his eyes began to harden, cooling into something sharp and brittle like obsidian. "He will regret this," Magnus said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sun will rise. He will regret the day he was born. The funeral was 3 days later. It was a gloomy affair at the Holy Trinity Cemetery. Adrian finally showed up. He wore a custom black Tom Ford suit and dark sunglasses. He played the part of the grieving father perfectly. He dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief when the cameras were pointed at him, because, of course, he had alerted the press. "My son was my light," Adrian told a reporter from the Seattle Times near the grave. "I was in a crucial meeting with international investors to secure his future when it happened. I rushed there, but I was too late." Eliana stood 10 feet away, frozen. She heard the lie. She wanted to scream, to claw his eyes out, but she was too weak. She hadn't eaten in days. Magnus stood behind her, a silent sentinel. He watched Adrian's performance. He watched the way Adrian checked his watch when he thought no one was looking. He watched Adrian wink at a young blonde woman standing by the periphery of the funeral. Tiffany, who had the audacity to show up wearing a black dress that was far too tight for a funeral. Magnus signaled to a man standing by a black SUV in the distance. The man was Lucas, not a bodyguard, but a private investigator who used to work for MI6. That night, while Adrian went out for drinks to numb the pain, which was actually a dinner date with Tiffany at Le Cuckoo, Magnus sat in his study with Eliana. "Drink this," Magnus said, handing her a cup of herbal tea. "I can't, Dad. I just want to die," Eliana whispered. "You will not die," Magnus said sternly. "You will survive, and you will watch him fall. But first, you must know the truth." Lucas walked in, carrying a thick manila envelope. He placed it on the mahogany desk. "Mr. Valerius," Lucas said, nodding respectfully. "I pulled the records you asked for." Magnus opened the envelope. He spread the photos on the desk. Eliana gasped. There were photos of Adrian entering the Four Seasons at 7:20 p.m. on the night Leo died. Photos of him and Tiffany on the balcony. But the most damning evidence was the itemized bill from the hotel and the phone logs. "Look at the timestamp," Magnus pointed a shaking finger at the paper. 11:42 p.m., room service, champagne and oysters. 11:42 p.m., text message received from Eliana Pierce. 11:43 p.m., device powered down. "He was ordering oysters while his son took his last breath," Magnus said, his voice trembling with a rage so potent it felt like it could burn the house down. "He read your text, Eliana. The logs show the message was read. He saw it, and he turned off his phone." Eliana stared at the paper. The sadness in her heart was instantly incinerated by a white-hot fury. She stood up, her hands clenching into fists. "He told everyone he was working," Eliana hissed. "He told me he was in a meeting." "He lied," Magnus said. "He has been lying for years. He has been siphoning money from your joint accounts to pay for that apartment he keeps for her. He used Leo's medical fund to buy a Porsche for himself last month." Lucas laid down another document. "Bank statements, Mrs. Pierce. He liquidated the emergency surgery fund 3 weeks ago. He bet it on a high-risk stock option that tanked." Eliana felt sick. He stole from his dying son? "He thought Leo wouldn't make it," Magnus said coldly. "He bet against his own son's life to make a quick buck." Magnus stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the dark estate. "Adrian Pierce thinks he is a shark," Magnus said softly. "He thinks he swims in an ocean where he is the apex predator. He has forgotten that there are krakens in the deep." Magnus turned back to his daughter. "Eliana, do you want a divorce?" Eliana looked at the photo of Adrian laughing with his mistress. She looked at the timestamp of Leo's death. "No," Eliana said, her voice turning into ice. "A divorce is too easy. He gets half. He walks away." "Good," Magnus nodded. "Then we don't sue him. We destroy him." "How?" Magnus smiled, but it was a smile devoid of any warmth. "He owns 51% of Pierce Dynamics, but he leveraged 30% of that as collateral for high-interest loans to cover his gambling debts and his mistress's lifestyle. The loans are held by a shell company called Vanguard Holdings." "Who owns Vanguard?" Eliana asked. Magnus tapped his chest. "I do." "Tomorrow, Adrian is hosting the shareholders' gala," Magnus continued. "He plans to announce a new direction for the company. He thinks he is about to become the richest man in the state." And tomorrow," Magnus said, picking up the photo of the time-stamped hotel bill, "we are going to attend that gala, and we are going to collect the debt. The morning of the Pierce Dynamics annual shareholders. Gala dawned grey and oppressive, a mirror of the mood inside the Pierce estate. The mansion, a sprawling modernist structure of glass and steel overlooking Lake Washington, usually felt like a trophy. Today, it felt like a mausoleum. Adrian sat at the head of the long granite dining table, scrolling through his tablet. He was checking the pre-market trends. Pierce Dynamics stock was up 4%. The sympathy play was working. The market loved a grieving father who threw himself back into work. It showed resilience. Eliana walked into the room. She was wearing a simple grey robe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked ghostly, but there was a new rigidity in her posture that Adrian, in his narcissism, failed to notice. "You're up," Adrian said, without looking away from his screen. "Good. We need to talk about tonight." Eliana poured herself black coffee. Her hand didn't shake. "Tonight?" "The gala," Adrian said, finally looking up. He frowned at her appearance. "You look terrible. You need to call your glam team immediately. I need you standing next to me on that stage. We have to present a united front. The rumors about my absence are starting to circulate on the fringe blogs. We need to kill them." "You want me to stand on a stage?" Eliana said, her voice flat. 3 days after we buried our son, and smile for your investors?" Adrian sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the incompetence of others. He stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. It felt heavy, like a yoke. "Eliana, I know you're hurting. I am too," he lied smoothly. "But Leo would want us to be strong. He would want his father's legacy to survive. If the stock drops, the foundation I'm setting up in his name loses funding. Do you want that? Do you want to hurt Leo's memory?" It was a masterclass in manipulation, weaponizing her dead child against her. A week ago, this would have broken her. She would have sobbed and agreed to anything. But today, Eliana felt the cold steel of her father's plan in her spine. She looked at Adrian's hand on her shoulder, the same hand that had held a champagne glass while Leo died, and felt nothing but revulsion. "I'll be there," she said softly. Adrian smiled, relieved. "Good girl. Wear the emerald dress. It matches my tie. And please, Eliana, try to look alive. For Leo." He kissed her forehead and left for the office. As soon as his Porsche 911 roared down the driveway, the back door of the kitchen opened. Magnus Valerius walked in, followed by Lucas. "He took the bait," Eliana said, taking a sip of coffee. "He thinks I'm still his obedient little wife." "Arrogance is a blinding light," Magnus said, sitting down. "He cannot see the cliff because he is too busy looking at the sun." Lucas placed a sleek, black laptop on the table. "We have access, Mrs. Pierce. Adrian's assistant, a woman named Sarah, was quite helpful. It turns out Adrian has been verbally abusing her for 3 years. She was more than happy to give us the passcodes to the gala's audio-visual system. "And the financial trap?" Eliana asked, looking at her father. Magnus smoothed his tie. "I spoke with the board of Vanguard Holdings this morning. The margin call is prepared. We are just waiting for the stock to hit its peak tonight. The higher it goes, the harder he falls. When the truth comes out, the stock will crash. When it crashes, the value of his collateral, his shares, will plummet. That is when we trigger the clause." Eliana nodded. She walked to the window and looked out at the grey sky. "He told me to wear the emerald dress," she murmured. "Do not wear it," Magnus said. "Tonight you do not dress as his wife. You dress as his executioner." At the Pierce Dynamics headquarters, Adrian was in a manic high. He was shouting at his CFO, a nervous man named Arthur Pendleton. "I want the projection charts up by 20%, Adrian barked. "Adjust the EBITDA. I don't care how you do it. Just move the losses to the next quarter." "But sir," Arthur stammered, that's borderline fraud. If the SEC looks closely, the SEC is blind if you feed them enough paperwork." Adrian slammed his hand on the desk. "Just do it. I have the Japanese delegation coming tonight. Mr. Tanaka is old school. He cares about family and stability. If he sees strong numbers and a grieving father, he'll sign the merger deal tonight. That's $100 million, Arthur. Do you want your bonus or not?" Arthur swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian dismissed him and leaned back in his chair. He pulled out his burner phone, a new one since he'd destroyed the old one, and texted Tiffany. "Tonight is the night. Be at the hotel bar. I'll slip away after the speech. We're going to celebrate being rich." He smirked. He really thought he had pulled it off. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was transformed into a wonderland of crystal and gold. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved silently through the crowd, offering flutes of vintage champagne. The elite of Seattle were there, tech moguls, politicians, and the heavy hitters from Wall Street. At the center of it all was Adrian Pierce. He looked dashing, if slightly somber, playing the role of the tragic hero to perfection. He shook hands, accepted condolences with a stoic nod, and spoke in hushed tones about resilience. "So tragic," whispered the wife of a bank CEO. "And to be back at work so soon? The man is a machine." "He's dedicated," her husband agreed. "That's the kind of leadership Pierce Dynamics needs." In the corner, the Japanese delegation, led by Mr. Tanaka, watched Adrian closely. Tanaka was a man of honor. He respected Adrian's apparent strength, but something in Adrian's eyes, a frantic, hungry gleam, unsettled him. At 8 p.m., the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Adrian walked out to thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, gripping the sides, looking down for a moment, as if gathering his composure. "Thank you," he said, his voice amplified through the high-end sound system. "Thank you all for coming. As many of you know, this has been the hardest week of my life. Losing my son, Leo." He paused. A hush fell over the room. Losing Leo felt like the end of the world. He was my heart, my inspiration. Adrian looked up, eyes glistening. He had practiced this in the mirror. "But I know Leo would not want me to stop. He would want me to build a future. That is why, tonight, I am proud to announce the merger with Tanaka Industries. This isn't just business. It's a promise to build a legacy that my son would have been proud of." The crowd began to clap. Mr. Tanaka nodded, seemingly impressed. Adrian smiled. He had them. Then, the large 40-foot LED screen behind him flickered. The Pierce Dynamics logo vanished. The room went silent as the screen turned black. Then, white text appeared. Thursday, November 12th. 11:42 p.m. Adrian turned around, confused. What is this? Technical difficulties? Cut the feed, he hissed at the sound technician in the wings. But the technician wasn't there. Lucas was standing at the console, arms crossed, staring at the stage. The screen changed. A photo appeared. It was high resolution, taken from a security camera. It showed Adrian Pierce in a hotel corridor, laughing, his arm around Tiffany. She was kissing his neck. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Then audio began to play. It was crystal clear. Just the ball and chain. She's hysterical. Leo probably just scraped his knee. I pay Dr. Kincaid a fortune to handle the messy parts. Adrian's face drained of blood. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. Turn it off! It's a fake! It's AI! He screamed, his voice cracking. But the video continued. 11:42 p.m. St. Jude's Hospital. A split screen appeared. On the left, the itemized bill for oysters and champagne, $450. On the right, the official death certificate of Leo Pierce. Time of death, 11:42 p.m. The contrast was brutal. The gluttony on one side, the tragedy on the other. No, Adrian whispered. He backed away from the podium, but the spotlight followed him. Then, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Eliana walked in. She was not wearing the emerald dress. She was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet, dark as a bruise, with a neckline that was sharp and severe. She wore no jewelry except for a single silver locket. Leo's. Her hair was pulled back tight. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen coming to sentence a traitor. Magnus Valerius walked beside her, his cane tapping rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Tap, tap, tap. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. The silence was absolute, save for Adrian's ragged breathing. Eliana walked up the stairs to the stage. She stood 5 feet from Adrian. She didn't shout. She picked up the microphone he had abandoned. You said Leo was your heart, Eliana said, her voice amplified, calm and cold. But while his heart stopped beating, you were ordering oysters. She pointed to the screen where the text message log was now displayed. Eliana, he's gone. Status, read at 11:43 p.m. You knew, she said. You knew he was dead, and you turned off your phone to finish your date. Adrian looked at the crowd. He saw the horror on their faces. He looked at Mr. Tanaka. The Japanese CEO stood up, his face a mask of absolute disgust. Tanaka signaled to his team, and they turned their backs on Adrian, a gesture of supreme disrespect, and began to walk out. Wait, Mr. Tanaka, Adrian pleaded, reaching out. This is a manipulation. My wife is mentally unstable. She's grieving. The only thing unstable here, Magnus's voice boomed from the floor, is your financial position. Adrian froze. He looked down at Magnus Valerius. What are you talking about, old man? Go home. Magnus smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. You leveraged 30% of your personal shares in Pierce Dynamics last year, Magnus stated loudly, addressing the room. You needed cash to cover your gambling losses in Macau and to buy the penthouse for your mistress. You took a loan from a private equity firm called Vanguard Holdings. Adrian's eyes widened. That's private financial information. I'll sue you. I am Vanguard Holdings, Magnus said simply. The room gasped again. Whispers exploded. Valerius, the shipping magnate, he owns Vanguard. The terms of your loan were specific, Magnus continued, pulling a document from his jacket. Section 4, Paragraph B, the Morality and Competence Clause. If the borrower engages in public conduct that significantly damages the reputation of the underlying asset, Pierce Dynamics, or if the stock price drops by more than 15% in a single trading session, the lender has the right to call the full value of the loan immediately. Magnus looked at the large ticker screen on the wall. Because of the live stream of the gala, the after-hours trading markets were reacting instantly. The news of the scandal, the video, the Tanaka walkout, it was all trending globally. Pierce Dynamics, PDYN, 18.5%, after hours. The stock is in free fall, Magnus said. I am calling the loan, Adrian. You owe Vanguard Holdings $40 million. Right now. I don't have $40 million in liquid cash, Adrian stammered. You know that. It's all tied up. Then, per the contract, Magnus said, I am exercising my right to seize the collateral. Magnus walked up the stairs, moving surprisingly fast for an old man. He stood next to his daughter. As of this moment, Vanguard Holdings is taking possession of your 30% stake in this company. Combined with the shares my daughter already owns, we now control 65% of Pierce Dynamics. Magnus turned to the board members sitting at table 1. As the new majority shareholder, I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the CEO. The chairman of the board, a man named Preston, who had always hated Adrian's arrogance, didn't hesitate. He stood up. I second the motion. All in favor? Magnus asked. Every hand at the board table went up. Motion carried, Magnus said, turning back to Adrian. You're fired. Adrian stood there, trembling. His empire, his reputation, his future, it had all evaporated in 10 minutes. You can't do this to me, Adrian screamed, his face turning purple. I built this company. I am Pierce Dynamics. You are nothing, Eliana said. She stepped forward, invading his space. You are a small, sad man who let his son die alone because he was too busy chasing a cheap thrill. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a thick envelope. She slapped it against his chest. Divorce papers, she said. She pulled out another envelope. And a restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of me or my father, you go to jail. Adrian looked around wildly. He saw Tiffany near the exit. She was trying to hide her face with her purse, scurrying away like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. She didn't look at him. She was already texting her next target. Security guards, men Adrian had hired, began to approach the stage. Mr. Pierce, the head of security said, his voice devoid of sympathy. We need to escort you off the premises. You are no longer authorized to be here. Get your hands off me, Adrian shouted, shoving the guard. That was the final mistake. The guard, a former Marine, didn't take kindly to being shoved. He spun Adrian around, pinning his arm behind his back in a painful lock. Let's go, sir, the guard growled. Adrian was marched through the ballroom. The same people who had toasted him an hour ago now held up their phones, recording his humiliation. Flashes blinded him. He could hear their jeers. Monster. Pathetic. Child killer. As he was dragged out the double doors, he looked back one last time. Eliana stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking up, her hand clutching the locket around her neck. She was breathing deeply, the first real breath she had taken since the monitor flatlined. Magnus stood beside her, his hand on her back, a pillar of strength. The doors slammed shut, cutting Adrian off from the world he used to rule. He was thrown onto the wet pavement of the valet circle. It was raining again. He sat there in a puddle, his tuxedo ruined, his phone blowing up with notifications of lawsuits, cancelled credit cards, and hate mail. He was alone. But the story wasn't over. Adrian Pierce was a narcissist, and narcissists do not accept defeat. As he sat in the rain, a new emotion clawed its way through his shock. Not remorse, not sadness, pure, unadulterated hatred. He reached into his pocket and found his car keys. The Porsche was still his. He still had a safe deposit box in the Caymans that Magnus didn't know about. "You think you've won?" he whispered to the rain, his eyes gleaming with madness. "I'll burn it all down. I'll kill you both." He scrambled to his feet and ran toward his car. The storm that had been threatening Seattle all evening finally broke with catastrophic violence. Rain didn't just fall, it hammered the earth, turning the I-5 north into a slick, treacherous ribbon of asphalt that disappeared into the dark. Inside the cockpit of the Porsche 911 GT3, the world was a blur of aggressive wipers and screaming RPMs. Adrian Pierce was doing 110 miles per hour, his foot mashed against the accelerator, as if he could outrun the reality that was closing in on him. The luxury sports car, a machine designed for precision and control, vibrated violently under his grip. It was a tangible extension of his own unraveling mind. For years, Adrian had operated with the belief that he was the driver of his own destiny, that people were merely traffic to be weaved around or run off the road. But now, the road was ending. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was swallowed instantly by the roar of the engine. "They can't do this!" he shouted, spitting saliva onto the leather steering wheel. "I am Pierce Dynamics. I built it. Me!" He reached for his phone, mounted on the dashboard, and hit redial for the 5th time. Cayman Private Wealth. The line clicked. "Mr. Pierce?" The banker's voice came through the speakers, clipped and terrifyingly professional. It lacked the usual warmth, the obsequious tone reserved for high-net-worth clients. "I have already explained the situation." "Explain it again," Adrian bellowed, swerving to miss a semi-truck, his tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second before catching grip. "Unfreeze the accounts. I need a transfer to Zurich. Now." "I cannot do that, sir," the banker replied, his voice colder than the rain outside. "We received a federal warrant an hour ago. The Department of Justice, in cooperation with the SEC, has flagged all assets linked to you for immediate seizure. The evidence provided regarding the embezzlement of company funds was comprehensive. We are complying fully to avoid liability." "Comprehensive?" Adrian choked out. "Who gave you the evidence?" "A holding company," the banker said. "Vanguard Holdings." Magnus. The name hit Adrian like a physical blow. The old man, the antique dealer with the cane, and the silent demeanor. Adrian had dismissed him as a senile relic, a grandfather who merely existed in the background. He hadn't realized that while he was playing checkers, Magnus Valerius had been playing 4D chess. "I'll kill him," Adrian whispered, the line going dead as the banker hung up. "I'll kill them both." He didn't just want his money back. That was gone. He knew that now. The logic of the businessman had been replaced by the volatile, explosive instinct of a wounded animal. He wanted blood. He wanted to see fear in Eliana's eyes, the same fear he had refused to feel when his son was dying. His phone buzzed again. A text message. He glanced at the screen, hoping against hope it was a lawyer, a fixer, anyone. It was Tiffany. "I'm at the district attorney's office, Adrian. They offered me immunity if I hand over the hard drives from the apartment. I'm not going to jail for you. You're on your own. Don't contact me." Adrian stared at the words. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The woman he had bought with his son's lifeblood. She wasn't just leaving him. She was burying him. With a howl of rage, Adrian ripped the phone from the mount and hurled it out the open window. It shattered against the pavement at 100 miles an hour. Instantly lost in the deluge. He was alone. Truly, completely alone, in a metal box hurtling through the dark. He took the exit for the Highlands, the tires screeching in protest. The winding road leading up to the Valerius estate was narrow, lined with ancient, towering pines that loomed like sentinels. The headlights cut through the driving rain, illuminating the steep drop-offs that lined the canyon road. Adrian reached into the glove compartment. His hand closed around the cold steel of a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. He had bought it years ago, a vanity purchase for protection, never thinking he would actually use it. Now, the weight of it felt reassuring. It was the only power he had left. The iron gates of the Valerius estate appeared out of the darkness, tall and imposing, topped with Gothic spikes. "Open up!" Adrian screamed, though no one could hear him. He didn't brake. He didn't signal. He simply braced himself. Crash! The sound was deafening. The Porsche, a masterpiece of German engineering, slammed into the wrought iron. Metal shrieked against metal. The heavy gates buckled, the hinges snapping under the sheer force of the impact. The hood of the Porsche crumpled like tin foil. White powder filled the cabin as the airbags detonated, punching Adrian in the face and chest. For a moment, there was only the sound of the hissing radiator and the pounding rain. Adrian gasped, choking on the chemical dust. He shoved the deflated airbag aside, his vision swimming. Blood trickled from his nose, hot and metallic. He kicked the driver's side door open and stumbled out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him over. He was soaked instantly, his ruined tuxedo clinging to his skin. He gripped the gun, his knuckles white. "Eliana!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Magnus, get out here!" He staggered up the long, gravel driveway. The mansion stood ahead, dark and unyielding. It looked like a fortress. Lights flickered on in the downstairs windows, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet lawn. Adrian reached the massive oak front doors. He raised the gun, aiming it at the wood, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "Face me!" he shrieked. "You think you can take my life? I am the one who knocks." The door didn't break. It opened, slowly, deliberately. Adrian stumbled back, wiping the rain from his eyes. He expected police. He expected security guards. Instead, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the air, deeper than the thunder. From the shadows of the foyer stepped Baron. The German shepherd was massive, over 100 pounds of muscle and instinct. His black and tan fur was bristled, his ears pinned back, and his lips curled to reveal teeth that looked impossibly white in the porch light. He didn't bark. He just stood there, a loaded weapon waiting for a trigger. Behind the dog, Magnus Valerius appeared. He looked nothing like the grieving grandfather of the funeral. He wore a heavy wool coat, and in his hands, held with the casual familiarity of a man who had hunted all his life, was a double-barreled shotgun. He broke the breech open, checking the shells, and snapped it shut with a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a sounding block. Clack, clack. Eliana stood beside him. She was wrapped in a simple shawl, her face pale but composed. She looked at Adrian, at the blood on his face, the gun in his shaking hand, the madness in his eyes, and she didn't flinch. "Put the gun down, Adrian," Magnus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly over the wind. "The police are 3 minutes away. Don't add murder to your list of failures." "Failures?" Adrian laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "I didn't fail. You stole it. You manipulated the market. You tricked me." "I exposed you," Magnus corrected, stepping onto the porch, the shotgun lowered but ready. "I simply turned on the lights, Adrian. You are the one who couldn't survive the glare." "I built that company for us," Adrian shouted, looking at Eliana. "For our future. And you? You betray me over what? Over Leo?" Eliana stepped forward, placing a hand on Baron's collar to hold him back. "I didn't betray you, Adrian. You died to me the moment you turned off your phone. Leo was weak." The words tore out of Adrian's throat before he could stop them. The filter was gone. The narcissist's mask had fully slipped, revealing the rotting soul beneath. "He was always sick," Adrian screamed, gesturing wildly with the gun. "He was a burden. He was a drain on my time, my energy, my resources. I was building an empire, and he was just dying. Why should I have stopped my life for something that was already broken?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Eliana stared at him. The last ember of love, or pity, or even hatred, was extinguished. All that was left was cold, hard indifference. "You're right," she said softly. "He was broken. But he was 1,000 times the man you will ever be." She looked down at the dog, her fingers uncurled from his collar. "Baron," she whispered. "Watch." It was a command to guard, to defend. But Baron, sensing the threat, sensing the malice radiating from the man in the driveway, interpreted it with primal efficiency. The dog launched himself off the porch. "No!" Adrian shrieked. He fired a shot wildly into the air, the crack of the pistol lost in the thunder. He turned and ran. Panic, blind and all-consuming, took over. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was prey. He scrambled back toward the wrecked Porsche, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the wet grass. He could hear the thudding of paws behind him, closing the distance. Adrian reached the car. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door just as Baron's jaws snapped at the handle, leaving deep scratches in the metal. "Start! Start, damn you!" He twisted the key. The engine sputtered, choked, and then roared to life, sounding ragged. Baron was at the window now, barking ferociously, throwing his weight against the glass. Adrian screamed, jamming the gear stick. He wasn't thinking. He just wanted to get away from the dog, away from the house, away from the eyes of the wife who had seen his true face. He slammed the car into reverse. He stomped on the gas. He forgot where he was. He forgot that in his initial crash, he had spun the car around. He wasn't facing the gate. He was facing the driveway. Reverse meant going backward. Toward the edge. The tires spun on the slick mud, finding no traction for a second, and then they caught. The Porsche shot backward. Adrian felt the stomach-churning sensation of weightlessness. The rear wheels left the gravel. Then the ground disappeared entirely. "No!" The scream was cut short as the car tipped backward over the embankment. The fall was slow, almost graceful in its terror. The world flipped upside down. The dark canopy of trees rushed up to meet him. Crunch. The car hit a rocky outcropping, flipped again, and rolled. Glass shattered, raining down on him like diamonds. Metal groaned and twisted. The roof collapsed. The Porsche came to rest 50 feet down the ravine, wedged upside down against the trunk of a massive ancient oak tree. Inside, there was silence. The engine hissed and died. Up on the cliff edge, Magnus lowered the shotgun. He placed a calming hand on Baron's head. Eliana walked to the edge of the driveway. She looked down into the abyss, where the faint red glow of the tail lights illuminated the rain-slicked leaves. She waited. There was no movement, only the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, winding their way up the mountain, coming to collect what was left. 6 months later, the sunlight streaming into the Leo Valerius Children's Wing at St. Jude's Hospital was warm and golden, a stark contrast to the grey storm of that fateful night. Eliana walked down the corridor, the heels of her boots clicking softly on the polished floor. She held a clipboard against her chest. She looked different, younger, lighter. The lines of grief that had etched themselves into her face were softening. "Ms. Valerius," Dr. Kincaid said, approaching her with a genuine smile. "I wanted to show you the new dialysis unit. It's fully operational." They stood before a glass partition. Inside, 3 children were undergoing treatment. They were watching cartoons on flat-screen tablets, laughing. The funding from the Pierce Dynamics acquisition made this possible, Dr. Kincaid said quietly. You saved them, Eliana. No, Eliana said, touching the silver locket around her neck. Leo saved them. She stayed for an hour, reading to a young boy with leukemia who reminded her so much of her son that it made her heart ache with a bitter-sweet warmth. When she finally left, the sun was setting. She climbed into the back of her father's car. Home, Mum? Roberts asked. Eliana looked out the window. Not yet. Take me to the Sunnyvale State Care Facility. Roberts met her eyes in the rear-view mirror, surprised, but he nodded. Yes, Mum. The drive took them away from the manicured lawns of the city centre to the industrial outskirts. The facility was a drab, concrete block surrounded by a chain-link fence. It smelled of industrial cleaner and boiled cabbage. It was a place where society stored the people it had forgotten. Eliana signed the visitor log. She didn't need a pass. Few people ever visited the residence here. She walked down the linoleum hallway to room 10. The room was small, shared by 2 beds. A curtain separated them. On the far side, a man sat in a wheelchair, facing the window that overlooked a brick wall. Eliana walked in. Hello, Adrian. The man in the chair couldn't turn his head. The crash had severed his spinal cord at the C4 vertebrae. He was a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. The only thing he could move were his eyes. Adrian Pierce, the man who had once commanded boardrooms and terrified subordinates, sat motionless. He was dressed in a faded hospital gown. A tube ran into his nose. His eyes darted to Eliana. There was no madness left in them. The drugs and the reality of his existence had burned it away. Now there was only a vast, screaming silence, a look of utter, desperate humiliation. I can't stay long, Eliana said, her voice conversational, devoid of malice. I just wanted to give you an update. She placed a photo on the small, scarred table in front of him. It was a picture of the new hospital wing. We liquidated the rest of your assets last week, she said. The penthouse, the cars, the watch collection. It all went to the foundation. Every single cent you tried to hoard is now paying for chemotherapy for children who can't afford it. Adrian made a sound, a low, gurgling rasp in his throat. Gah! He wanted to scream at her. He wanted to tell her he was still powerful. But he wasn't. He was a ward of the state, dependent on overworked nurses to feed him, to wash him, to turn him over so he didn't get bed sores. I talk to Leo every day, Eliana said, leaning in slightly. I tell him that his father finally did something good, even if you didn't mean to. She straightened up, buttoning her coat. She looked at him one last time, not as an enemy, but as a stranger. You wanted to be alone, Adrian. You didn't want the burden of a family. You didn't want to be weighed down. She gestured to the empty, silent room. You got your wish. Goodbye, Adrian. She turned and walked out. She didn't look back. Adrian watched her go. He watched the door close, shutting out the light from the hallway. He tried to move his hand, to pound on the armrest, to enact some tiny rebellion against his fate. But his hand remained still. He was left staring at the photo of the hospital wing, trapped in the prison of his own body, as the sound of the rain began to tap softly against the window pane, a rhythm that would continue long into the lonely night. This story serves as a brutal reminder that in the grand theatre of life, the script is never truly in our control. Adrian Pierce believed his wealth and status made him immune to consequences, but he forgot the most fundamental law of the universe. You reap what you sow. His arrogance blinded him to the suffering of his own flesh and blood, and in the end, poetic justice placed him in a prison of his own body, helpless, just as his son had been. It is a tale of tragic irony, proving that money can buy silence for a while, but it can never buy peace. If this story of karma and ultimate justice moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with more people. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas, unexpected twists, and stories that hit deep. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode,